Hey guys, Chicky Domain, Debut.com with a Debut.com forecast update. This forecast update effective around 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, July 26, 2017. And start you off with some climatology. We are now at 45 days until the peak of the 2017 Atlantic tropical cyclone season. In this image, you can see that when the season starts off June 1st, we get some early seasonal development, not very much, and then once we get into August, that's when things begin to quickly ramp up. August is known as the bunny month, and when we look at tropical cyclone tracks over the last 100 years, this is the typical track coming out of the MDR and main development region. And if you've been following our forecast over the last 30 to 60 days, you know we've talked about the fork in the road. And here's a clear example of the fork in the road. And what we mean by that is that oftentimes tropical waves traversing the Atlantic off towards the west like this, the tropical wave can get in here towards the eastern Caribbean, and the main wave access continue off through the Caribbean and through the Yucatan Channel and up in the Gulf of Mexico. This is a typical track for this time of year, but also sometimes the northern extension of tropical waves can get split off by the main wave access that's traveling through here, and an area of spin develop in here north of Puerto Rico and Hispaniola and work its way into the Bahamas. Now there's two typical tracks for this as well, a continued northwest movement towards Florida and then or an out to sea scenario like this, curving like this. So the Atlantic is starting to wake up right on time, as the National Hurricane Center is now put a 20% chance of development of what will likely become 97L invest over the next 4 to 5 days. Models have been hinting for the last 4 or 5 days now that something tropical in nature was going to come up in here and be east of the islands in about 10 days. We're now starting to approach real time as models have now dropped into inside of 10 days. Going to start you off now closer to home with a developing gale off the mid-Atlantic over the next 96 hours. Now, this is going to put some negative swell factor in the water as a strong southwest flow is going to develop. We'll switch you over to some satellite imagery now of this morning, and we've got this front here that's draped in here from Texas all the way across Florida and then through the Outer Banks, and then an area of low pressure up in here. So the flow is like this from the southwest to the northeast. Up here, it's out of the northwest to the northeast. And this type of pattern is something that we typically see going into May and June, and what's typically what produces homegrown development. If you watch the rule of thumb is always watch tail ends of fronts or along stalled or dying fronts for an area of low pressure to develop. So not only are we going to be watching for possible tropical development coming out of the main development region, there are some hints of a possible OBX low setting up in here at about the same time as this tropical feature tries to lift out or in towards the eastern Caribbean. We'll show you that here in the models in just a few moments. Going to switch you out now to the East Atlantic. And here's this morning's infrared loop. And you'll notice here in the left-hand portion of your screen, upper level low digging in and then moving off towards the west. And you'll see the intertropical convergence zone starting to lift in here a little bit. And you'll see that there is a connection to the intertropical convergence zone and this upper level low feature. It's now dragging out what's over Africa. Latest forecast is for an area of low pressure that's over Africa over the next 48 hours to move out into the East Atlantic waters. Now, there are 4 tropical waves that are traversing through here, but it's this area of low pressure that's forecast to move off in the next 48 hours that gives the chance of that 20% chance of development that the National Hurricane Center is pointing out this morning. Now, there is some uncertainty in the forecast, but it looks like a solid swell is going to set up out of this, and we'll show you that here in the models in just a few moments. We are already starting to pick up on the first signs of that. here in the 96-hour swell forecast out of the NOAA's Ocean Prediction Center. Here's this southwest swell component that we talked about here just a few moments ago. But if you look just south of that, you'll see that east-southeast swell periods are starting to pick up out of the 8 to 10 seconds out of the east-southeast. And we'll draw this over for you because there also is, out of that gale that's developing, some northeast surge that's working in here against that southwest flow that hopefully will help in turn the rest of the ocean coming out of the MDR and some increasing swell. You can see northwest swell in here turning into north swell over on the right-hand portion of your screen at 12 to 13 seconds. So there is some different swell energy out in the Atlantic in this region. Switch you over to last night's run, the 06Z run of the GFS, and we'll advance the model for you going into 72 hours. And you'll see right here off the coast of Africa, here is this area of low pressure now that's moving into the East Atlantic. And as it does, east-northeast winds start to increase 30 to 35 knots, could see some 40 knots. And as we advance the model going into the weekend, you can see a nice fetch of 30 to 35 knot winds developing around this clockwise high. So the flow is like this with high pressure. We've got a tropical entity, a tropical wave, lifting up out of the intertropical convergence zone, and that's going to be tightening up the pressure gradient. Now, also, here is this gale that's developing off the mid-Atlantic. Again, negative swell production out of the southwest, but we've got building swell in here, and you got to remember, time, distance, travel factor. So although this is negative at the moment, would not allow any swell in. The swell is just starting to build. Advance the model for you a little bit. And as you can see, the GFS brings in a secondary area of low out of that intertropical convergence zone because that first piece of energy is now into here. Now, models had previously taken these two features and combined them, giving possibility of tropical development east of the islands. That is still a possibility. We're watching for that. We'll know a little bit more about that in the next coming days. Advance the model now going into Tuesday or Wednesday, I believe this is, of next week. So it looks like an extended period, guys, of surf coming. If you'll notice back along here, towards the U.S. East Coast, you'll notice that the winds have lightened up quite a bit, but we still got a nice gradient and fetch of east-southeast winds in here with building swell. Going to switch you over to the latest run of the Euro model. And same thing, we'll advance the model for you going into 72 hours, and you'll see that in 72 hours, the European model, I'll back that up, drops that area of low pressure into the East Atlantic and gets it heading our way. Again, nice fetch of east-southeast winds or easterly winds, 35 to 40 knots in here. Advance the model, some more for you. This approach is going into the weekend, and that fetch of winds now north of Puerto Rico. Now, the one positive factor of the European model is the European model has that fetch a little bit more above the lat 20 line. For those of you not familiar with that, if you were to draw an imaginary line through Hispaniola and Puerto Rico through the Atlantic, what I'm saying is that the European model has winds up in here versus the GFS having the winds down in here. This gives these winds wide open ocean with no blockage except for the Bahama shadow in here. Advance the model a little bit more for you because you'll see that the European model within inside of 10 days starts to develop. 97L could end up being Emily, something that we'll be watching for. But another thing that we're going to be watching for is the possibility of an OBX low developing in here at the same time. Now, right now, it looks like it would stay close to shore. This could end up being, if it does develop, a negative factor in that because swell time travel in here, if an area of low pressure was developed right off here off the southeast U.S. coast or in the Outer Banks, that southwest flow that developed on the underneath side could end up knocking the swell down quickly. So there is some negatives, guys, but lots of time to watch. So stay tuned for the updates. That's all we got for you for now, and thanks for following.